Everything that we know and have learned about mankind and its place in the universe suggests that we are a part of the norm. We are not the exception. Within the last month, a planet was identified that has water, a mere 110 light years away from Earth. We need to begin to prepare to accept and understand that we are not alone in the universe, have not been at all throughout this time.
The same year that life-giving water was discovered on a distant planet, the U.S. Navy made a startling announcement. Images captured by its pilots of objects exhibiting a vastly superior technology were authentic.
We can start to finally, at long last, after all these decades, begin to answer these questions about the origin of these vehicles, where they're from, how they're made, how they function, and why they're here.
People need to know there is something else out there.
To fully understand, we must examine a body of evidence long suppressed, a parallel history to the one we think we know, stretching back at least 70 years. On a clear, sunny day in 1955, William Coleman, a decorated World War II pilot, took off from Miami on a routine flight to deliver a B-25 bomber to an airbase in Mississippi.
My co-pilot said, "Look at that bright spot up there. I think it's just a reflection of the sun, a craze probably in the windshield."
He and his passengers, two aviation engineers, realized it was a strange object, making a rapid descent right across their flight path.
My God, look at that thing. I opened it up to max continuous power. Here we're clipping right along at over 300 miles an hour, right on the treetops. I'm right on the tail of this thing. As we got closer, I said, it doesn't have a tail, doesn't have any wings. Look at the shadow on the ground. The shadow is perfectly round. That's not an airplane. And I said, I'm overtaking it. So I said, hang on. So I'm gonna make a hard turn. There it was, a disc going across the field with two big swirls. What I didn't see was any exhaust, propulsion, no rivet lines, a rounded edge about that size, where it all came together. A true flying saucer.
Then it seemed to vanish until they spotted it thousands of feet above them.
Bright, yellow, sunnish looking object. It went like a bat out of hell.
After they landed, the stunned witnesses were separately debriefed by Project Blue Book, the Air Force investigation of the UFO phenomenon. Ironically, a little over a decade later, Colonel William T. Coleman became public spokesman for Project Blue Book.
Probably what we saw may have been from somewhere else. Look, the Air Force is a very deadly being when it comes to intercepting an unknown. If it proves hostile, we're going to shoot it down. Other than that, no problem.
In the late 1940s, America seemed impregnable to military threat. It had just emerged from World War II, masters of the air. the only nuclear-armed superpower in the world. But in 1947, something appeared in the sky and everything changed.
Every newscaster and every newspaper across the nation has made headlines out of it, and this afternoon we are honored indeed to have here in our studio this man, Kenneth Arnold, who we believe may be able to give us a first-hand account and give you the same on what happened.
I kept looking for their tails. They didn't have any tails. I thought, well, maybe something's wrong with my eyes. They seemed to flip and flash in the sun just like a mirror. I'd be glad to confirm it with my hands on a Bible because I did see it, and whether it has anything to do with our Army or our intelligence or whether it has to do with some foreign country, I don't know.
Arnold had sent this sketch to the Air Force following his sighting. He was later invited to California's Hamilton Field Army Air Base, where he was handed what he was told were authentic photos of a similar craft.
At the request of Lieutenant Colonel Donald Springer, commanding officer of the 4th Air Force Intelligence, and was given the above prints as a courtesy for the assistance he had given military intelligence.
The photo was taken in Arizona, just 2 weeks after his own encounter.
They said that my father's sighting of flying saucers got more attention than the ending of World War II. He was besieged by newspaper reporters from all over the world.
Reporters interviewed United Airlines pilot E.J. Smith, who also flew the Northwest route. He joked Arnold had likely been fooled by a cockpit reflection, until he too became a witness a few weeks later. He and his stunned crew had watched as 9 discs maneuvered in formation for a full 45 minutes.
And from there, it just exploded. The first few days in July of 1947 had a very large level of sighting activity.
These unknown objects barnstormed across the country, sometimes in fleet-like formations that looked like a deliberate show of force.
Hundreds of people told Air Force investigators they'd seen the saucers with their own eyes. Bright, shiny things that whished through the air at incredible speeds. Even airline pilots who seldom indulge in fantasy reported sighting them. And Air Force flyers told of chasing them, or something, all over the sky. The Air Force called them unidentified flying objects, but people went right on calling them saucers and seeing them. There was something in the air.
Well, the Air Force has the best brains in the country working on it. General Nate Twining, the Air Force Chief of Staff, says that if there are saucers from Mars or Jupiter or some far-off planet, and that there is a people and a world that far ahead of us, he doesn't believe we even have to worry about it.
But a then-secret memorandum by the same general suggested that the highest military echelons thought there was plenty to worry about. The memo states, quote, "The phenomenon reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious." It described metallic discs, circular in shape, with domes on top, often traveling in formations of 3 to 9 craft. It also listed aerodynamic capabilities with disturbing implications for national defense, extreme rates of climb, dazzling maneuverability, and a superior capacity for evasive action.
A lot of people expected that the United States government was about to confirm, okay, they're ours. This is an exciting new technological advance that we were testing, and now it's time to tell people about it.
Occasionally, eyewitness testimony included compelling photographic evidence. Evelyn Trent was feeding her rabbits when she spotted a metallic disc-shaped object floating over their farm. She alerted her husband Paul to grab his camera, and he managed to get 2 shots. They described the object slowly hovering before it abruptly sped away. Life magazine picked up the story, and the McMinnville UFO became a global sensation.
There's no chance of this being weather. There's no chance of this being a star or an aircraft. This is either some kind of structured object that we don't know what it is, or it's a hoax. Paul Trent and his wife, they were honest, simple, hardworking people who never made a dime off the photographs that they took. They never tried to make a dime off of it.
It just come up like that, and then it tipped, and just, I mean, it really went. It went fast. I've never seen anything go so fast in my life as that thing went. Yeah.
In 1951, future astronaut Gordon Cooper, while training in Germany, chased a large formation with his squadron of fighter jets.
Unlike fighters, they would almost stop in their forward velocity and change 90 degrees, sometimes in their flight path. And within the next 2 to 3 days, we'd had practically all the fighters we could muster on the base up climbing as high as they would climb, with guys with binoculars in them, still trying to spot these strange devices flying overhead. And we never could get close enough really to pin them down, but they were round in shape and very metallic looking. And they would come over and do the same maneuvers that we make, except every once in a while one of them would go zip. And you just can't do that in a fighter.
Like two saucers, one inverted over the other. They seemed to be made of some kind of polished metal. When I first saw the objects, they were almost overhead. By the time I had the camera ready to go, they had moved to a considerably greater distance.
But the unknowns showed no signs of hostility, an otherworldly power on its own mysterious mission. Commercial pilots William Nash and William Fortenberry, former Navy aviators with thousands of hours of flight experience, saw 8 huge discs fly in a stack formation over Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, just a stone's throw from Washington, D.C.
When they came out over the blackness of the bay, they're distinct, 6 red coins. When they got closer, we could see that it looked like you were looking down into it, like a hot coal.
They reported the glowing red objects had approached them head-on at a speed they estimated at 6,000 to 12,000 miles per hour.
It came in like this and went out like this. There would be no way of making complete reversal or a 90-degree turn, 12,000 miles an hour or greater, without making the occupants juice on the wall. That kind of really shook us up. Looking at the thing shook us up. Nothing could have gotten to that degree of scientific progress without some of the intermediate steps having become public knowledge. We just knew that they were not from this planet.
The next weekend, the unthinkable happened. The nation's capital was invaded from the skies. 7 unknown blips suddenly appeared on radar at Washington National Airport. Air traffic controllers at both Andrews and Bolling Air Force bases confirmed the objects as they danced through restricted airspace.
Capitol building, the White House where the president lived, these were some of the most important places in the country when it comes to national defense. And there were UFOs violating this airspace, and there was nothing that the Air Force could do about it.
F-94 interceptors were scrambled. Pentagon press liaison Al Chop was in the radar room that night.
We could see the planes coming in on this radar scope. The minute we saw the beginning of these guys, the UFOs disappeared. They just left. They obviously, whatever these things were, had intelligence enough to get out of the area when we had an intercept going in.
But the next weekend, it began again. Pilot William Patterson pushed his Starfire jet to maximum speed to try to intercept one of the glowing objects.
Flew right into the middle of 3 or 4 of them.
Al Chop recalls the pilot's panicky air-to-ground transmission as he streaked at 600 miles per hour into a group of unknowns.
He actually said, "They're closing in on me. What do I do?" It was frightening.
The Air Force had just issued orders to shoot down the unknowns if, quote, they can't talk them down.
I'm not going to tell an Air Force pilot to fire at the damn thing or anything. What? I didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. And then all of a sudden, things began to move away from him. And he said, "They're gone." I'm convinced they're solid objects. I'm convinced that they're probably from another planet or from outer space somewhere. I've always felt that way since that night.
The very next day, the Air Force's top brass hastily prepared the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II. Seen here in a last-minute huddle, General Roger Ramey, Air Force Director of Operations at the Pentagon. Captain Edward Ruppelt of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigations arm, and Director of Air Force Intelligence, General John Samford.
Since 1947, we have received and analyzed between 1,000 and 2,000 reports that have come to us from all kinds of sources. Of this great mass of reports, we have been able adequately to explain the great bulk of them. However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States.
In the Q&A with reporters, Samford suggested a 50-50 chance it could have been radar waves bouncing off temperature inversions.
The point that Samford put across all too effectively was that they were not real. They were just tricks of the atmosphere. And atmospheric phenomena can't be a threat to national security. You don't shoot at clouds.
The public was pondering the implications of possible extraterrestrial contact.
Robert L. Farnsworth, president of the United States Rocket Society, urged defense officials not to permit our planes to fire at any flying saucers. He says this might alienate mankind from beings of far superior forces. Farnsworth feels that friendly contact should be sought as long as possible.
Behind the scenes, the CIA had other concerns. A secret internal memo urged immediate attention to unexplained objects in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations.
I would dare say, if anything happened that we thought was a threat to our national security, somebody out there, one of the services, would respond to it.
Remember, this is the height of the Cold War. Okay, there are bombers on both sides loaded with nuclear bombs.
Dr. Jacques Vallée was the inspiration for the French UFO researcher in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
N'avez-vous pas fait récemment une rencontre?
Have you recently had a close encounter?
In real life, Dr. Vallée conducted sober scientific research on the phenomenon.
We know now that there is no simple answer.
For decades, he met with witnesses and traveled the globe gathering evidence, ultimately creating the first database on the UFO subject.
Mr. Chairman, all the great nations of the world are represented on this committee.
let us keep in mind that the UFO phenomenon may represent an even greater reality.
Vallée also consulted with scientific, military, and government officials, including Project Blue Book's top science advisor, Dr. J. Allen Hynek.
I began my work as scientific consultant to the United States Air Force as an open skeptic.
Hynek was a university astronomer with a high security clearance when the Air Force recruited him to investigate UFOs.
And it so happened when the Air Force got the job of trying to figure out what some of these strange flying saucer stories were about, well, they needed an astronomer to see how many of the reports could possibly be explained as meteors and twinkling stars and planets.
The two scientists became close colleagues, with Hynek entrusting Vallée to index the reams of Blue Book files scattered throughout Hynek's home. It was there that Vallée made a chance discovery of a letter so secret he had to appeal to the chief counsel of the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee to get it declassified.
That document changed my life. It taught me that the subject had been taken much more seriously than anybody thought.
The document revealed an ultra-secret, highly funded scientific investigation, working parallel to Blue Book, unknown to all but a select few. The letter was signed by H.C. Cross, Director of Exotic Metallurgy at Battelle National Laboratories.
These were the people who had analyzed the files with a large budget, with highly competent physicists and computer scientists. Who are these people? What information did they have?
Good evening. Tonight we go after a fantastic story. The story that flying saucers from other worlds are visiting our planet, just as we are exploring outer space with our own rocket satellites. Our guest is former Marine Air Corps Major Donald Kehoe in his campaign to prove that flying saucers exist. My name is Mike Wallace. The cigarette is Parliament. Why will the United States government withhold information from United States citizens? For what reason?
The Air Force is simply treating the American people like children. They don't trust them with the facts.
During the 50s and 60s, it wasn't just the Americans who were seeing flying saucers. At the Westall School in Australia, several hundred students saw an object hovering over this power line tower on their athletic field, an event they vividly recall 50 years later.
A student came into the classroom, oh, there's flying saucers in the oval, there's flying saucers. And everybody ran out. And I remember the fear and the hysteria of all the students.
I couldn't believe it because what I was seeing wasn't possible.
It was vertical, horizontal, move away from us, back towards us, appear somewhere else.
My God, but it was exciting.
It was like that, and then all of a sudden it just turned on its side, and I could see that it was a round disc.
The children saw the disc begin to descend into this wooded reserve at the end of the school's running path.
I ran towards the corner of the school, jumped the fence, and ran towards where it looked as though it went down into the trees, and then stopped dead because it was right in front of me on the ground. Like a disc with a slight rise in the middle. I also heard a low sort of a humming noise, and I felt a bit of a heat coming off it as well. And it started to take off pretty well straight away. It had all bluey purple lights around the bottom. Don't remember seeing any windows. And it took off to about probably 4 or 5 meters in the air and then turned on its side and just went zoom straight up so fast that there's just nothing even nowadays that could go that fast.
Shortly after the object departed, the authorities converged on the school.
We had Army, Air Force, police down there cordoning off the area to prevent any of us entering the area or disturbing anything.
We got called to assembly. The headmaster said, "You have not seen this. You do not talk about it. You'll be in trouble if you do."
For the first time ever, the school science teacher agreed to describe what he saw that day, providing we concealed his identity.
It was not a mirage. There was something physical in the sky. It was silver. It could hover. It could move slowly. It could move very rapidly. Eventually, it moved away to the other side of the oval and down behind some pine trees. I was not then, nor ever have been, able to use my knowledge of the world, nor my scientific training, to provide a rational explanation.
What he said next sheds light on why the school's staff have remained silent all these years.
I was a knock on the door one night. Two older men, one in uniform, asked for my description of what I'd seen. I was then told that I hadn't seen anything, that I'd made it all up, possibly because I was drunk, and that they would have to report that fact to the education department and I would lose my job. After that, I was told that I would be prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act, and I was told that there wasn't anything there when I knew there was, and that I had to keep quiet about it. Why did I have to keep quiet?
The Westall landing may not have been an isolated incident. 4 days prior, a then young engineer in nearby Baldwin was taking photos in his mother's garden when something caught his eye.
This tremendous flash of light, and I looked up, and I saw this object, and I pulled it. I had a Polaroid camera, and I pulled this up, hit myself on my face, and I took the picture, and I got the photograph here.
This is the original Polaroid.
That's it. Just up it is. It looked like it was made out of some form of metal, and it was engineered. And being an engineer, I was sure it was. And that's when I took the photograph, and it tipped around, and I could see the bottom, and it looked like it was rotating to me. And that was it. And then after that, it sort of gave a bounce, and it rocketed away to the north, very high speed.
Can you describe the acceleration?
It was like almost instantaneous, like it had been shot out of a gun. Wham, you know.
Air Force officers showed up at his doorstep, asking for every detail of his experience.
And they also had some photographs of similar things. And they also had a book which had pictures of things in which they didn't leave with me, but nevertheless I had to look through. But they said it was an unidentified flying object. So that was it. You know.
What was the implication?
That it didn't come from anywhere on Earth.
Project Blue Book, with a skeletal staff, continued publicly collecting thousands of cases. Despite efforts to explain them away, hundreds were still filed as unknown.
Several reports of a strange egg-shaped object about 200 feet long landing on farms and highways last night in the vicinity of level land. Sheriff Clem says he even himself got a glimpse of the thing, which somehow turned off lights and auto engines when it came near.
The object is taken home, almost straight up at a terrific speed.
Within 24 to 36 hours after these sightings in Levelland, Texas, at the White Sands Proving Ground, very close to the Trinity test site where they first detonated the first atomic bomb, military personnel witnessed a glowing egg-shaped object that apparently landed.
This is Bill Haggard, public information officer of White Sands Proving Ground, New Mexico. What they saw looked like a landing and takeoff of some controlled object from outer space.
Well, I was chasing a car up Park Street. It was reckless driving. I saw this big cloud of smoke, so I decided to let go of the car and go up there and investigate. By the time I got there, I could see a big white object sitting in the arroyo. I couldn't tell what it was at first. My radio was dead. It didn't work at all. I could see some figures. Looked like they were walking around the craft there.
They appeared to be dressed in white coveralls and were childlike, that is, small.
One was in front and the other option was in back.
Zamora added that one of the two persons turned his head and looked straight at him.
When I got out of the car, about 50 feet from it, I guess they saw me because they started their motor or whatever it is. I could see a big blast of fire coming from right under it. So I was behind some bushes there, behind my car. I could see it and I could feel that heat. That really got me scared, you know. A lot of people say, why don't you take your gun out and shoot at it, you know, and that weren't doing nothing to me, so. It just took a little while to get, airborne. Came up a little bit, about 20, 30 feet, and it stayed there a little while. And it stayed just as quiet as it could be. And then just flew away, that's it.
Lonnie was very, very scared. He was as white as a sheet. From here, went directly to the church to talk to the priest, okay?
Pablo Lopez was among the first to arrive at the landing and takeoff site.
The ground was still smoldering, some of the weeds that were around it.
This rare footage gives us a glimpse of the scene shortly after the incident. Patrolman Zamora stoops to point out one of the landing gear imprints where officers had just placed rocks to protect the fresh ground traces.
And then there was two sets of footprints, like so. That was about the approximate size of them. And in comparison to a quarter, that's pretty small, okay? That's about the size of them.
Within an hour and over the next several days, officials from the FBI, military, and Project Blue Book documented the evidence at the scene.
Were there any prong marks on the ground or anything like that where you could see where it had landed?
There were 4.
Very unusual footprints. How many were there?
2 footprints one side and 2 footprints on the other side.
Of course, the burn area there.
I was behind my car. I could see it and I could feel that heat. They told me that all over the state they had been seeing some of those flying saucers, whatever you call them. They gave me a book on it, you know, and they told me to go ahead and read it. Well, it says not to say nothing on it. Keep away from it. Don't say too much, you know.
It was the middle of the night by the time Lonnie came home.
Oh, he was real pale. And I thought he was sick. I said, are you sick or something? He said, no. He said, I was just working. He was like he was angry. What I knew about it was when I started reading the papers, you know. Started coming out and everything. I said, well, what's this that you saw? I don't know. He said, it's just a headache. He said, everybody's after me, and some believe me and some don't.
Dear Mr. Zamora.
Dear Mrs. Zamora.
I'm interested in UFOs.
Sure, I believe you saw an egg-shaped spacecraft that had passengers.
I saw a UFO myself in the summer of 1958.
Go on for a week telling you what I've seen. Boy in our school science fair had 3 pictures that look just like the flying.
I thought I should write to you to tell you that you are not alone in your sighting of this object.
I have pictures of a couple of egg-shaped ships taken.
I read
about you seeing a
I'm a
flying
retired
saucer.
teacher.
Well, you have a friend
This
who
saucer
believes you.
phenomenon has changed my life and ideas.
Homer said when it took off, it set his lawn on fire.
1960, the Red Glove officers and dozens of people saw it.
Can you tell me how long it stayed on Earth? And other things like that.
And then people started making fun of him that he had seen little men from outer space or this and that, and a whole bunch of dirty stuff.
A lot of people ask me, is that the reason you quit the police force? No, the reason I quit the police force because I was going into, a lot of publicity and stuff like that, and I didn't want to hurt the town.
The level of inquiry went all the way to the office of the president. To this day, the Socorro close encounter remains unexplained.
Socorro was very similar to the French cases that I had brought to Hynek's attention. Checked by the police, checked by the French Air Force, where there were also occupants who were seen, short beings in connection with the objects. I think that's what convinced him that there were UFO landings in the United States.
It looked like a toy top, somewhat upside down.
This is the diagram in which we've come up with. It's more flat here other than round, but it does have the hump up in here.
It seemed to move off the ground if it was down. And then we saw 3 lights that went from yellow to red.
When we got right up to it, it lit up. I mean, it really became bright, and we could see it, the outline of it real good.
Blue Book's Dr. Alan Hynek investigated one of the alleged landing sites with the local sheriff. At an overflow press conference later that day, the world held its breath for an historic revelation about the landings in Michigan. Hynek, by now privately convinced of the UFO reality, struggled to follow the Air Force policy of tamping down public excitement.
Now, are you saying that the sightings in the Ann Arbor and Hillsdale areas definitely were caused by marsh gases?
I'm saying that the 2 cases that I investigated most deeply were most likely. I said in a statement that I couldn't prove it in a court of law.
In other words, you're saying then that you don't know what caused it?
No, that's not quite right. I think that a person can be pretty sure about something without being able to convict somebody of a murder.
Can you say?
Yes, I do, honestly, in this case.
But you can't say without question that this is what caused it.
Hynek's strained explanation, which he later called his greatest regret, ignited a public furor.
Mr. Ford, what about flying saucers? You've had some in Michigan in the past week.
Dave, we've had several incidents that many felt were sufficient to justify some action by our government, and not the kind of flippant answer that was given by the Air Force where they passed it off as a swamp gas. It seems to me that this mystery does require that the Congress take a good look at it. Let them put their record on the line.
On April 5th, 1966, congressional hearings were held with Dr. Hynek and Secretary of the Air Force Harold Brown both giving testimony.
Mr. Ford has come out. He has a pretty good-sized stature in the Congress. And so, Mr. Secretary, see if you can shed some light on these highly illuminated objects.
Mr. Secretary, there have been charges that the Air Force is hiding something in the UFO field.
We have not been hiding anything. The investigations have been made public. The hearing this morning was public for just that reason.
There has never been any evidence presented to the United States Air Force or discovered by the United States Air Force which would indicate that the UFO phenomenon represents any interplanetary space vehicle of any kind.
Amid growing pressure, the Air Force commissioned an outside panel of scientists to analyze select cases and settle the matter once and for all. It was headed by physicist Edward Condon.
Dr. Condon, do you hope to find people from outer space here on Earth?
Well, I don't know for sure, but we'll try to just study the reports and get as much additional information as we can to see.
Would you like to have us being visited by these little or big things?
Well, that'd be fine with me, if I hope they're friendly.
How do you propose to go about studying?
After the project was launched, Condon remarked to an audience that he thought the UFO subject was nonsense, but, quote, "I'm not supposed to reach that conclusion for another year." After a 2-year investigation, the panel submitted a massive 1,400-page report showing that many cases were radar and weather anomalies, but confirming a number as truly unexplainable. Among them were the famous McMinnville photos taken on the Trent family farm, as well as film footage of UFOs in Great Falls, Montana.
As I looked up, I saw 2 silvery objects moving swiftly out of the northwest. No sound, except I thought I heard a whooshing sound when I first saw them. The discs appeared to be spinning like the top and were about 50 feet across, which was much slower than the jets which shot by shortly after I filmed the discs. I could not see any exhaust, wings, or any kind of fuselage. They appeared to be of a bright, shiny metal, like polished silver.
There are cases that are not explainable in conventional terms. There is the assumption of intelligence or intelligent control, but not necessarily the assumption of direct communication. Why are they here? What are they doing? What do they want from us? What are their motivations?
But it was Dr. Condon who wrote the final word. There appears to be no verified and fully satisfactory evidence of any case that is clearly outside the framework of presently known science and technology.
I would kind of wallow on that one. You'd have to conclude that what we were looking at was beyond our current state of the knowledge.
But it began to hit me that Dr. Condon has apparently not read his own material very carefully. You do an actual tabulation, which he doesn't seem to have done, and you find his percentage of unexplained is 5 to 6 times larger than the Air Force, and yet, what is his principal recommendation? The principal recommendation that Dr. Condon has come through with is there's nothing of scientific interest that warrants further attention on the part of the federal government here in any major way. He recommends dropping the whole problem.
Nobody could get funded, nobody would look at the data seriously because of the prestige of the academy, saying that the problem had been solved. The Air Force closed their reporting system so that if the public wanted to report something, they would report it to the local police, but it would never get to the attention of scientists really examining the phenomenon.
In 1969, the Air Force officially ended its public investigations.
Which would suggest what? That they knew what it was?
Or didn't know what it was.
Also the other way, that they did know what it was.
One aspect of the phenomenon that was swept under the rug was the pervasive reporting of UFO intrusions at the world's most sensitive military facilities. Details did not come to light until decades later at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C.
Declassified U.S. government documents and witness testimony from former or retired U.S. military personnel confirm beyond any doubt the reality of ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
What you have heard here today is evidence of a phenomenon
It sounds fantastic, and it is fantastic. In 1967, I was a missile launch officer stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana.
Malmstrom was America's first line of nuclear defense. Its silos packed with Minutemen missiles, each one nearly 100 times more powerful than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. Launch officers could, within minutes of confirmation, send their birds arcing 6,000 miles to incinerate key Soviet cities, triggering a war that would end our civilization.
I was the chief of party, I was the observer. Basically what I was doing was the star observation to provide precise latitude and longitude. On our small three-man team, came from the north and stopped right over us. And it had a white light from the center looking down into the silo. I just said to myself, what if this thing beams us up and takes us off to some distant place and never return to Earth again? I mean, this is going through my head here while this thing's above me. And then from this dead stop, it shoots off to the east. It's just like, now you see it, now you don't. It just...
The strike team that went out claimed that they saw something. How did they describe that? He just said a large round object directly over the LS. Directly over the site.
Lieutenant Salas was stationed in his underground launch control capsule when he received a frantic call from one of his topside guards.
Screaming into the phone saying they're looking a red glowing object hovering just above our front gate. Our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled.
In fact, 10 missiles began going offline in a matter of seconds, one after the other.
Personally, I'm never aware of any 2 missiles going down at the same time, let alone 10.
I was a top secret control officer, and I passed out nuclear launch authenticators. I can clearly recall a message coming through my communications center, which basically said that a UFO did in fact shut down several missile silos in Montana.
I was on duty at Echo, which is our squadron command post. We had strike teams respond to alarms from the missiles. They were 3 to 5 miles away. And they said, sir, lack of a better description, there's a flying saucer hovering over that missile, and there's a beam of reddish light going down to it. It had to be a data collection thing. I'm sure they scanned the warhead or something.
In 1980, I was reassigned from the Pentagon to RAF Bentwaters as a deputy base commander. At that time, Bentwaters was one of the largest tactical fighter ranges in the world.
It was also the largest American nuclear bomb storage depot in Europe.
In December 1980, early in the morning, several of our security policemen discovered strange lights in the forest.
Expecting to find a crashed aircraft, they came upon an unrecognizable object resting on the forest floor.
They observed it for a period of time, and it very quickly and silently vanished.
2 nights later, Colonel Halt received an urgent visit from the base security commander.
He was white as a sheet. He said, "It's back." He said, "What's back?" He said, "The UFO." I took several security policemen with me. I also had my small cassette recorder I carried everywhere when I was on duty.
What is it? We don't know, sir. So you can I get some? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. And all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Deathly calm. This is weird.
One object approached us at very high speed.
Here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
We stood there in awe. Was this a warning? Was this an attempt to communicate? Was this a weapon or just a probe?
Just as suddenly as it appeared, click, it disappeared. We stood there, wow. About that time, we noticed the other object to the south was sending down beams, about a mile and a half away over Woodbridge Base, when we had great difficulties communicating, but we were able to discern that some of those beams were either falling into or near the weapons storage area, and there's a great deal of concern. I also found out later that both the tower operators at Bentwaters saw an object and picked it up on their Bright 2 radar and watched it.
I was just sitting there and I happened to see a dot come on the scope, and it just went like one dot at the beginning, then another dot, and it was gone. And then it made an immediate right-hand turn and came right towards the base. Just absolutely phenomenal.
It's not like any radar target I've ever seen traveling at an extremely high rate of speed. It passed over the control tower, and then it stopped. It was an orangish color. Sort of popped into my mind at the time that somebody's flying a basketball out here. There were like lights around the center of it. It was more like portholes, and then you were seeing the light from the inside, but it hovered momentarily, reversed its course, and went back out at a high rate of speed.
Even more alarming incidents took place on both sides of the Cold War. According to once secret Soviet documents, a UFO hovered over a Ukrainian nuclear base for nearly an hour. Inexplicably, several missiles suddenly switched to full combat readiness and began a launch sequence without any authentication codes. After 15 heart-stopping seconds, the countdown to a potential Armageddon ceased as abruptly as it had started.
As this object passed over the missile site, we would start getting erratic indications on that missile. The bad thing was we also got a launch indicator.
Does that mean that the launch sequence has been triggered?
That means that the missile has received a launch signal.
The countdown had to be manually aborted.
We have UFOs in the air.
These witnesses are some of the most highly vetted military officers in charge of the world's most devastating armaments. If what they're reporting is accurate, then the pattern is hard to avoid. UFOs have been making incursions into top security nuclear facilities decade after decade.
To me, it's pretty clear. This is just, we're shining a light on this, we're pointing it out. What are you people doing with nuclear weapons?
As the 90s dawned and the walls fell down, it was as if humanity itself was demanding to be seen as one people and one world. The Soviet Union had dissolved, and history's spotlight began to shine on long darkened corners.
Different officials were looking for ways to open dialogue with the West and embrace all the changes that were underway in their country at the time.
This is George Knapp in Moscow, the city many are...
Knapp's team was invited to Moscow by government and military officials who were willing to share decades worth of UFO files.
General Igor Maltsev, for 7 years commander of the entire Soviet air defense system, recalls a UFO flap over Moscow in 1990. Hundreds of visual and radar observations by military personnel. Maltsev confirms his standing order was, don't fire on the UFOs. March 1991, radar at the Leningrad airport detects first 1, then 2, then 3 unidentified objects hovering over a nuclear plant. From a dead stop, the UFO zipped away at 2,000 miles per hour.
Jacques Vallée was one of few Westerners to personally investigate the case by meeting with Russian sources firsthand.
An object hovered near a nuclear power plant in Voronezh, and a beam from that object melted the asphalt there.
The intention was maybe we would be able to find out from the Russians more about what the American government knows about UFOs than we will ever learn from the American government itself.
Governor, are you ready to take the oath?
I am. When a young, open-minded president was sworn in, one of America's most highly placed civilians saw a chance for a new government transparency on the phenomenon.
As a means of access to people, to the wonders of nature.
Heir to the power and influence of one of the world's wealthiest families, Lawrence Rockefeller, philanthropist and conservationist, also had a passionate interest in UFOs.
His idea was to approach the president with a plea for making available the data that the government had on the subject.
The first inclination by particularly people in government is, you gotta be kidding me. You want me to risk my career by getting deeply into the rabbit hole of talking about UFOs? And so there's a tremendous resistance.
Rockefeller met with President Clinton's science advisor, Jack Gibbons, at the White House and persuaded him to take action. Rockefeller was then asked to pick a case that the White House should attempt to declassify. He chose the 1947 Roswell incident, noting, quote, "Many are convinced that Roswell marks the beginning of government secrecy about UFOs."
Jack had actually gone to the Air Force, asked then Secretary Widnall, who was the Secretary of the Air Force, to take a look, particularly at the records around Roswell, New Mexico.
Dear Colonel Cavett, the General Accounting Office seeks to fully explain the claim that the U.S. government recovered an alien spacecraft near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947, and since that time has covered up that fact.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
According to my dad, there was a bad thunderstorm the night before, and the next day he was out on the ranch and he found this debris.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force.
Roswell was then home to the world's only nuclear air wing, including the B-29 that had dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The base's chief intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel, was dispatched to the ranch to investigate.
We had to follow the rancher out there. With just verbal directions, we never would have found it.
Marcel and another officer were the first military to arrive at the crash site. They came upon an expanse of unrecognizable debris strewn across an area the size of a dozen football fields.
There was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. We found a piece of metal about a foot and a half to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. The thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't dead it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off it.
Marcel was ordered to immediately transport the strange wreckage to Fort Worth Army Airfield. There, Marcel was met by the commanding general, who told him to keep silent in the face of what was becoming a media frenzy.
They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that.
Marcel was instead ordered to pose with wood, foil, and rubber debris from a conventional weather balloon.
All I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who told the newspapers what it was and to forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon. of course, which we both knew differently.
Colonel Thomas DuBose, who was also ordered to pose with the fake debris, describes how an iron curtain of secrecy slammed down.
This is the highest priority you could exhibit, and you will say nothing. More than top secret, as he said it. Beyond that, this is the story we're going to tell the public. It was a cover story, the balloon part of it. In order, we don't have any more inquiries about what we picked up on the desert.
Congressman Schiff, what got you interested in this subject per se?
I started receiving letters a little over 2 years ago from constituents stating that they believed the government was covering up what happened at Roswell. Many of them clearly believed that it was, in fact, an extraterrestrial crash. The weather balloon story never made sense because there was clearly and undisputed, in my mind, extra military attention to this matter, from extra security around the crash scene to special handling of whatever the debris was. That could fit a classified project. It doesn't fit a weather balloon.
In September 1994, the Air Force issued its response, the Roswell Report, case closed. The Air Force claimed it was a secret project of weather balloons hung with box kites and microphones to spy on Soviet nuclear tests.
Please roll the video.
There's the famous box kite that became the famous flying disc. The weather balloons that were on the balloon train.
Same rubber balloon, same foil box kite as the original cover story, only many of them strung together with microphones dangling beneath.
That's the tinfoil paper, rubber, and sticks that they recovered in the desert near New Mexico in 1947.
The Air Force, nearly 50 years later, was basically telling the same tale. That the top security personnel of the world's only atomic bombing wing really had mistaken this rubber, wood, and tinfoil for a crashed flying saucer.
Being an intelligence officer, I was familiar with just about all materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It was not anything from this earth that I'm quite sure of.
My suspicion is that the Roswell incident did happen, and something maybe not from our universe went down there. And we should allow the American people to make a judgment on what that might have been by disclosing. I mean, this is probably the most blatant case of overreaction to what is national security. The public has a right to know.
Rockefeller put together a briefing document intended for world leaders with a sobering observation. It is conceivable that even the president himself is not fully briefed on matters classified as above top secret.
I did attempt to find out if there were any secret government documents that reveal things, and if there were, they were concealed from me too. I wouldn't be the first president that underlings have lied to or that career bureaucrats have waited out. But there may be some career person sitting around somewhere hiding these dark secrets, even from elected presidents. But if so, they successfully eluded me, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell you I did try to find out.
3 feet per second contact now. That was a beautiful one.
Apollo astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who had grown up around Roswell, was an aerospace insider with deep Pentagon connections. He became convinced there were UFO secrets concealed from normal government channels.
Well, if the accounts are to be believed, yes, there have been ET visitation, there have been crashed craft, there have been material and bodies recovered, and there is some group of people somewhere that may or may not be associated with government at this point, but certainly were at one time, that have this knowledge.
No one has proven there's nothing to it. No one's had the opportunity to prove there's something to it. And that's what I did.
And every passing day,
in 2007, the most powerful man in the Senate, Majority Leader Harry Reid, persuaded two colleagues, Senators Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye, to secretly allocate millions in Defense Department funds to investigate UFOs. The covert program operated from the tail end of the Bush presidency through the Obama administration and into Donald Trump's first year in office. In December of 2017, the lid blew off. At long last, the government was admitting a modern-day program to investigate UFOs and released startling official evidence, including videotapes from the cockpits of military aircraft. One of the key authors of the Times story was investigative journalist and best-selling author Leslie Kean. She went to Washington to meet with Luis Elizondo, who had just resigned from his position as head of the secret Pentagon UFO program.
I was invited to this meeting. They wanted me to meet Mr. Elizondo to see what could happen.
Objects that are moving so fast, and yet we don't see an ionization trail in the air, and you don't hear a sonic boom. How is that possible? Another one is...
Elizondo's colleagues took her aside to reveal some extraordinary documentation related to the program.
I wasn't allowed to take anything with me. I mean, the most important evidence that was shared with me at the meeting regarding the phenomenon itself were the videos. I knew this was breaking news for the front page of the New York Times.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the SA. My gosh. It's rotating.
My co-author, Ralph Blumenthal, and I set up a meeting with Mark Mazzetti and said we had this explosive story. Sat down with him in the New York office of the New York Times, and we brought in all the documents. These are the videos. Here's other documents that show the existence of the program. And here's what they've studied, and here's what they've learned. And here's a letter from Harry Reid about the program.
Elizondo's colleague, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon, managed to obtain the tapes from the Pentagon and chose the New York Times to break the story.
I received the videos, the now famous videos, in the Pentagon parking lot from a Defense Department official. I still have the originals in the packaging.
This is a case where somebody bent the rules a little bit, and they did so for the larger good, and we're absolutely all better off because of it.
In the end, I have to say I was still extraordinarily disappointed with the New York Times because they focused on this small ATIP program, and the real story, in my mind at least, should have been, these things are real, they're here, this is happening now.
One of the Pentagon cases reported by the New York Times was an encounter by naval aircraft about 200 miles off the coast of San Diego, California.
5,500 people that were on the Nimitz in 2004 when this happened, and I guarantee every single one of them knows that this event happened. That's a whole air wing, that's Mount Fuji, that's Japan.
Commander David Fravor was leading a training exercise from the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group when he was abruptly ordered to investigate an unknown target that had appeared on one of the ship's radar scopes.
We're going to suspend the training, we have real-world tasking, so we're like, okay, cool.
He and another F-18 Super Hornet, each carrying 2 airmen, zoomed toward the coordinates.
So it's myself and my Wizzo, and the other pilot and the Wizzo in the back seat of that airplane, so there's 4 of us.
When they arrived, they first saw what appeared to be a large object slightly below the surface of the ocean, with a strange oval-shaped craft darting around in the air just above it.
If you picture a Tic Tac that's about 40 feet long, you know, round on both ends, no rivets, no metal, smooth white. It was white. It was just smooth, no wings, no propulsion, no windows. It didn't matter which way it was pointing, because as it was moving over the water, it would go, you know, it never turned it never changed its longitudinal axis. It went fore, aft, left, right. It was just doing this. And I said, hey, I'm gonna go check that out. All of a sudden, you just see it turn its body and go, whoop, and start coming up at you. You go, that was rather interesting. We're just looking at it, we're doing this, and we're looking at it, we're looking at it, we're looking at it. We go around all the way around the outside of the circle 180 degrees. Well, I know where he's going, so I'll just go over there. So this thing goes poof, and it's gone. I mean, literally that fast. Gone. You can think about what we're saying, like, holy shit, what the is that? You know, and then there's a lot of, dude, what the? Did you guys see that? Do you guys see it? And they're like, it's gone, we don't see shit. Nothing accelerates that fast. You're talking, you know, something that not only accelerated beyond anything that we had seen, but it just was. The controller comes up and says, hey, you're not gonna believe this, but that thing is back at your cap point.
Meaning the object had instantly reappeared at the precise secret coordinates of the fleet's critical aerial defense zone.
It obviously had some awareness. It knew where we were going. That'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And I actually told my backs here, I said, I don't know about you, I'm pretty weirded out.
More jets, equipped with the Navy's most advanced radar visual tracking systems, were scrambled. This time, capturing the object on video.
First thing he gets is a little blip on the radar. He puts his cursors over it, and he tries to grab a lock on it. Basically, when you take a lock, you tell the radar, look at that location and stare at it and put all your energy on that point. Well, as soon as it does it, the radar gets indications that it's being jammed by the object it's trying to lock. The infrared sees differing temperatures, so the Tic Tac is actually hotter than the air around it. It doesn't have to be by much, but it's going to appear white. They're driving straight at it. It's just kind of hovering there. And then it goes poof, and it takes off the side. I just don't know. I doubt that we have developed that technology.
I interviewed 3 of the 4 aviators who were with Dave during that encounter. And it was readily apparent to everyone involved that that vehicle had what they call dominant battle space awareness. It was in control of that engagement from the outset. There was no question that it completely outmatched our frontline fighters. I served on the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, so I had access to all of the black programs in those days. We know perfectly well there's nothing like that behind the scenes or even on the drawing boards.
Senator Harry Reid, who instigated the secret Pentagon UFO program, confirmed what nuclear launch officers have been reporting for decades.
There's more than one up there.
UFOs have interfered with our country's most powerful weapons.
If they had been called upon by the president to launch, couldn't have done it.
Did you have anybody in the Defense Department, the Pentagon, pull you aside, bend your ear, and say, why are you doing this?
They did everything they could to stop the program from going forward. They gave the person that came to me initially such a bad time. He's fortunate to have hung on to his job because people tried to get rid of him because they wanted nothing to do with this. The Defense Intelligence Agency was one of the worst. They drugged their feet, even though there was one of their senior scientists thought they should look at this. And remember, all we're saying, nobody has to agree that why it's there, but shouldn't we at least be spending some money to study all these phenomenon? Shouldn't we study this stuff? The answer is yes. And that's all this was about, and why the federal government all these years has covered up, put brake pads on everything, stopped it. I think it's very, very bad for our country.
I interviewed Gordon Cooper, Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper, back in the 90s. Cooper said on camera that there was a landed UFO at circa 1957 at Edwards Air Force Base. His camera crew captured the filming of this object, and he presented this to the higher-ups, and eventually a courier jet came in from Washington. He handed the footage over, which was good. He viewed it.
That's the last he saw of it.
Exactly. Did you know where that footage went of the flying saucer that landed on the tarmac?
Went to Washington, that's all that I know.
Did you ever keep in touch with anybody about it or discuss it?
How would I keep in touch with anybody about it? There's no way within the military or within the government of keeping track of something that is classified.
Did you try to go after stuff like this?
We did. We have. It's there.
Are you saying that there's some evidence that's still hasn't seen the light of day?
I'm saying most of it hasn't seen the light of day.
Astronaut Cooper had spoken with the president at a cabinet meeting. He raised this with Secretary Cohen, and then Cohen's office called me and asked me to pursue this and chase it down. The Air Force colonel that I spoke with got very frustrated, and when I asked him what happened to all of these records, he said, well, that was all cleaned up or thrown out to save space, something like that. That sounded ludicrous, but that's what he told me. If there is some recovered debris, say, it is so deeply buried and squirreled away that it's outside of those normal oversight processes, and that's where there's a problem in this area.
Dr. Jacques Vallée has collected purported metal debris from UFO cases dating as far back as 1947 that experts are analyzing in a state-of-the-art laboratory.
The breakthrough has come with the invention of a machine that enables us to look at the atomic structure. And at that point, the atomic structure is impossible to fake.
This device is a multi-parameter ion beam imager.
Dr. Gary Nolan, a Stanford microbiologist, is using a revolutionary three-dimensional imaging device to analyze the samples right down to their individual atoms. When Dr. Nolan placed some of the fragments in the vacuum chamber of his instrument, he was astonished to find their composition was unlike any known metal.
Just one spot, and the isotopic composition all the way across.
No matter where he looked in the sample's jumble of elements, whether magnesium, iron, nickel, or titanium, the ratio of isotopes didn't make any sense.
If you're talking about an advanced material from an advanced civilization, you're talking about something that I'll just call it an ultra material, right? It's something which has properties where somebody is putting it together, again, at the atomic scale. So we're building our world with 80 elements. Somebody else is building the world with 253 different isotopes. I intend to use the information to try to build something, to try to understand a physical principle that we don't know today.
This material was manufactured. It's not natural. It's not natural to the materials that we have around us in the lab or on the Earth. It does not mean that it was necessarily made someplace in outer space. It just means that it was manufactured specially for a particular purpose that we don't understand, and we want to understand it.
There is an immense array of unanswered questions. What we observe some of these craft doing, think about the possibilities, what we may discover technologically, how we might solve the energy crisis, how we might raise our standards of living. There is an urgent need, in my view, to get to the bottom of it. We don't know the origin of these vehicles, nor do we understand the intent of whoever is controlling them.
There are cases that seem to go beyond encounters with an advanced technology to contact with an engaged intelligence. Papua New Guinea, June 1959. An Australian missionary spots a large disc hovering just 200 feet off the ground while standing with 38 other people.
This solid-looking object, and can you imagine what it's like to look up in the sky and see some figures up there?
All were amazed to see 4 small occupants dressed in what looked like black diving suits.
Figures walking about on top and not the slightest noise whatsoever. And so we waved. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get this object down onto the playing field? And as we waved, wondering whether we'd get some recognition and whether perhaps they would understand what we wanted, they waved back.
The encounter lasted several hours before the object abruptly departed.
There was this amazingly incredible speed that the whole craft disappeared to nothing across the bay in a matter of a second or so.
In 1994, 3 days of sightings across Zimbabwe culminated in what some believe is the most significant close encounter in modern history.
Hundreds of people today phoned the ZBC and the BBC correspondent in Harare saying they sighted an unidentified flying object last night. We have some eyewitness reports.
It almost seemed to be under the clouds. As it came past, I noticed there's no noise, and that's when I thought, well, there's something very odd here.
It was quite amazing. It was beautiful.
They are saying that Jesus is passing through Africa. That's what they are saying.
We interviewed about 64 children in front of the camera.
The UFO story that happened.
Just say exactly what you want to say, okay?
Well, I was running and playing, and then I saw this maroon color in the sky. Why don't we follow it? We saw this, like, a silver thing down there. It was a silver oval thing that flew past really slowly.
I saw the bigger one, and the spaceship, like 4 or 5 of them. It was red, green, and yellow.
There was this big ship. It had these lights, these patterns, and it flew.
I thought, no, it's not a UFO. And then I looked carefully at it, and I thought, maybe.
Dozens of children said that one or more of the disc-shaped objects landed just beyond the far edge of their playground. The next thing they knew, something was standing next to it.
We saw him standing by the silver thing, and he had big eyes.
He had a big head and big black eyes and was dressed in a black bodysuit.
They were wearing pure black.
And I came down and I saw the funny man with his eyes here, and I saw a spaceship, and there were a few little ones around it.
How far away were you when you saw him?
Not very far. Not very far. About a meter away.
A meter away, that close?
Yes.
And how big was the figure?
It was about as big as a grade 6.
I believe that the children did see something.
I believe them because normally children don't lie.
I've always taught my children seeing is believing. Unfortunately, I didn't see, so...
This alleged encounter caught the attention of Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack.
Seemed that he was looking at all of us.
What did it feel like when he was looking at you?
Felt scared.
It felt scary? What was scary about it?
Well, felt scared because I've never seen such a person like that before.
And I saw this person, and it had big eyes. That's all I saw about it, big eyes.
They had short legs and quite a long top, with a big head and eyes that are bigger than ours.
How much bigger than ours?
4 or 5 times the size.
4 or 5 times the size of ours.
So then I was looking at him, right?
Yeah.
And then he was looking at me back. I couldn't just keep on looking at him, so I had to stop and I looked sideways.
But I was looking straight into his eyes.
Well, he never said anything. It's just that the face is the eyes. Maybe they're trying to communicate with us, show us something which we don't know about.
I think they want people to know that we're actually making harm on this world and we mustn't get too technologed.
We don't look after the planet, and all the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
Is this an idea you have had before, or did this idea come to you when you had this experience?
When I had this experience.
For the first time in nearly 20 years, the Ariel school children gathered from the 4 corners of the world to talk to each other about the experience they shared that September morning.
I remember something there.
One they all still struggle to understand.
You know that it's moving, but
I stand by what I saw. There was no reason for any of us to make that up.
I've not spoken to anybody about it. Not because I'm not proud of it, but because I don't want the stigma.
So it's something that I've had to deal with for 19 and a half years.
I don't want to say I felt like I knew it, but I knew that I didn't have to be afraid of it.
They took us back to the moment of contact.
No, exactly how I felt, exactly.
The details still seared into memory.
I was with one of the other girls and saying to her, "This is amazing."
We all were just stopped in our tracks.
A little man appear on top of the actual craft. And that moment for me was very distinct because I was like, that's not human.
Well, I was just completely engulfed in these eyes.
The eyes, and in that moment, however long it was, because I have no idea of the time frame, it was mesmerizing.
There was no talking. It's all just images in the head. Telepathic communication.
They were trying to communicate, trying to tell us something. It was something to do with the environment.
I kept getting these thoughts and ideas in my mind of technology. Technology's not helping, technology's bad.
And we're going down a wrong path, and we have to start recognizing that what we're doing is detrimental, and we need to make changes. And I don't know what to do with that, or they were reaching out to us. It was as if they wanted us to go with them. At that moment, that was kind of when I snapped right out of the trance.
As soon as I broke contact, all of those feelings, technology, the bad, the horribleness that was happening and going around my body at the time went.
It's making me a bit anxious being back here.
I can feel it right now. I was scared.
They came running up here in such a panic, screaming, ah, and then they were here, you know, and a child can't make that up.
So I was there when they were interviewing them and saw the way they were. It was just a huge big mess and muddle up and just people everywhere. Just asked them questions straight off without explaining to the children what they were doing and why they were doing it.
It was chaos in terms of the media frenzy that was going on and us being so young and not even being allowed time to comprehend what we had seen.
So,
Our teachers certainly didn't believe us, so that was a big deal, because we had to continue going to school there.
We went back one last time to the Ariel school to meet with Judy Bates, a teacher at the time of the incident, and now the headmistress. Something was weighing on her that she wanted to tell the children.
Yeah, I said I wanted to apologize. I should have taken more notice. But I didn't. I was more concerned about me and not them, and what was going on in my own sort of experience. And that's what, yeah.
And if you could summarize in just one sentence what took place September 1994 here at Ariel School, Ruwa, Zimbabwe, what would you say?
Aliens visited us. And that's about it, yeah. And that's where if you believe it, you believe it. If you don't, well.
We find ourselves confronted with something that challenges our very understanding of reality. We may be sharing this fragile blue-green oasis with an unknown other. One with a mysterious relationship to humanity and its own interest in our world.
And if you saw him again, what would you do?
I'll ask him what is he doing on Earth and what does he want with us.
They were well-observed UFO cases, just like modern cases in the 18th century, in the 17th century. There was science. There were astronomers. They had telescopes. And they were very good observers because their life depended on being good observers. And these observations come from all over the world. They just have been forgotten.
I like to think of anomalies, mysteries as opportunities. And we'll go after those mysteries, take the torch away from the campfire and out of the cave into the darkness and make some amazing discoveries.
The UFO phenomenon, as studied by my colleagues and myself, bespeaks the action of some form of intelligence.
tendência dos governos é acobertar tudo aquilo que ele não consegue explicar à sua população.
These objects gave the impression that they wanted to be seen. With these enormous spotlights, there was no way that they were trying to hide. So why? That is the main question. Why do these objects want to be seen?
Later on, I was so sorry that why I did not call on the radio, ask them, who are you? Please, make communication with us.
I figure if they're smart enough and capable enough to to come into our airspace with the technology that they have, if they wanted to do us in, they could have done us in a long time ago. So I'm not fearful of this at all.
咱也确定不了当时是什么东西，但是肯定不是飞机，
并且可以瞬间的这个出现或者消失，甚至可以悬停在空中。
我觉得如果这样公开于世界的话，会极大的促进世界人类的科学技术水平的发展，有利于人类的进步，这是一件大好事。
There went when I'm going to zip.
You went like a bat out of hell.
Jumped about 10 degrees to the right, just like this.
I've never seen anything go so fast in my life as that thing went.
Incredible speed, disappeared to nothing.
And just went zoom straight up so fast.
It's like it had been shot out of a gun. Wham!
Now you see it, now you don't. It just, phew.
But it just was